Just a quick note, if you get anything out of this podcast, or if any of the listeners get anything out of this podcast, it'd be great if we could have your reviews on iTunes. That's how we get more listeners, that's how we get noticed, and it would be really, really good if you could just take 2 minutes out of your day just to go on there, good or bad, and write a note, or even just give us a few stars, or whatever you feel is apt. Much appreciated.
What a bust here by Christian Cullen. Plenty of support, and what a dummy!
Welcome back to the Fantasy Rugby Draft podcast. Thanks for downloading and listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson, and joining me again in the booth today is the man primarily made of moss, Nathan Mossman. How are you, mate?
I'm good. I've come to consider myself as kind of the George Bailey of fantasy rugby in the sense that you come to me for advice and I tell you the exact opposite of what you should do.
I was going to ask if you've given an Australian a send-off in the last couple of days, but those who have been watching that series will get that reference.
Oh, yeah. No, George Bailey's he's taken some crucial wickets for New Zealand in the series.
Yeah, a bit of controversy. It's always good. It's 10th of February, and in this podcast, I think we'll go through some news and notes that we have, look at some pre-season games, have a quick chat about the podcast league, and then look at what the talking heads call ADP, or average draft position. So we'll get into a little bit of the rises and the fallers in that. A little bit of admin. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rugby Draft. That's Fantasy RUG Draft. We're on Facebook. But if you have any other full questions, to drop us a note on support at fantasyrugbydraft.com. Right. Conscious of time, we've got a lot of news to get through. There's a lot of pre-season that's actually kicked off and underway. Potentially the South Africans would have hoped that it actually hasn't kicked off, but I guess the first news that came through this morning was Handré Pollard out for 9 months. Big blow for the Bulls, big blow for the Springboks. Just terrible news for him. I guess for fantasy rugby draft managers, can you draft him, Mossman?
I'm assuming that was a joke, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? It can't be. I looked at his the teams that he played in the fantasy playoffs. The last 2 games are against the Sunwolves and the Cheetahs. So I have to assume that there's going to be some interesting trading going on, and about that second to last week for the folks that are going into the playoffs, but aside from that, you can't own them, can you?
No, definitely not.
You just don't have enough room on your bench. 6 spots is so crucial you need to use every one of those.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're in some kind of keeper league, no, absolutely not. And it's obviously a crushing blow for him, and it does upset the apple cart a little bit in terms of fantasy as well, because, he was one of those nailed on first round guys. So yeah, it'll rejig, people's thinking, I think, especially with him and, possibly a few other guys that we'll mention, just in terms of where you go to in that first round, I think.
So when we talked to Brendan, he wasn't 100% sure about Pollard's backup at the time when he was talking about his shoulder, but it seems like it's Francois Brummer. I guess he's just going to be one of those players in fantasy that's just another guy at this point.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I won't profess to know too much about either backup, but I do know, actually reading an article about the Pollard injury, and a number of people who are obviously Bulls fans just saying we've got no chance without him, and not being very complimentary to those potential replacements.
Sure. So if you've already drafted, and you drafted Pollard, and Brummer was on the waiver wire, it was a free agent, you'd pick him up, you'd swap him straight out?
Yep. I mean, he'll have value.
To lose?
No, he'll have value as a guy who will probably start. So, yeah. But you're also, you're hoping that maybe you got possibly one of the other backups as well.
Like a Peter Grant or something like that in that range down.
Yep. No, definitely.
Late rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Some other really good news coming out of South Africa was Patrick Lambie. Goodness gracious, that poor guy. 8 weeks or something.
Was it endangered species, I think, the number 10 in South Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of alluded to it a little bit kind of tongue-in-cheek in the last podcast about Lambie being, perennially injured. He's done it the last couple of seasons. We felt a bit sorry for the lad, and this has come about. What do you make from Lambie now? Because I hear it's 8 weeks, so how far does that drop him back? And then to add a little bit of confusion. Have you heard of a fly half called Garth April? So, Garth April is playing fly half for the next Sharks match with Joe Peterson on the bench.
Right. Yeah, this sounds like a fictional character, doesn't it?
I wonder if Coach Gary Gould just kind of winding us up. I actually think it's just a bit of rotation. I think he wants to know what Garth April can do now that he's going to be a backup to Joe Peterson. I think this is how it's going to play out. You're right. We touched about, it was a few weeks back, talking about that we generally felt that there weren't too many genuinely injury-prone players. He's obviously one, Lambie, but it throws all kinds of doubts in there now because he's got this injury history. Last year when he was injured, it took so long for him to come back, and there was so much uncertainty that during that period that there's sort of a big black mark against his name for me. He'll be coming right down, I would have thought. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if you were at a point where you needed a fly half, would you draft Joe Peterson or Patrick Lambie? And let's just put it in a vacuum, no one else available. Yeah,
well, that's a tricky one. Because,
it is factors involved, right?
And the reality is that you're unlikely to be in that situation. I mean, let's be honest. But 8 weeks of Peterson, and then it's a 50-50 call, isn't it? Because it's about half a season versus let's just say that you hope that it doesn't come down to that.
I know, and look, it was we've only had 2 days of the injury where they've revealed it's 8 weeks, so we've got 2 and a bit weeks to the start. So maybe it's 6, and maybe it comes back to wherever their bye finishes. It may fall into it. So I'll probably still just lean in Lambie's favour, but you know what? It's a difficult situation. It's a bit like Carter Slade last year, right? You couldn't actually draft both of them because they're going to be in the same region. Someone else will grab him, so you're going to have to pin your colours to the mast. And in that situation, I'm probably going to avoid either mast.
Yep. I mean, for me, pretty much outside the top 10, I would have thought, or pretty close to it.
Oh, absolutely. So we dropped them down into the 3rd round.
Right.
Yeah, at this stage. And we put them side by side because we genuinely feel that is the value of them. But as I say, if I had that decision at that point, it would have to be me being very comfortable with my fly half and my couple of outside backs that I've already drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, Damien Delende. I'm hearing a few more rumours that the injury could be a lot worse than it actually has been reported at the moment. I will just kind of emphasise it is a rumour, but we dropped him back again as well. I think we've got good news about Harold Forster as well. He might be back in pre-season, so I think we'll probably draft him ahead, but scary news for that as well. And another one from the Chiefs, and I thought it was a bit odd, this one. It was Augustine Pulu. He broke his arm in the sevens. I thought he dedicated himself solely to the sevens and he wasn't going to play Chiefs. Have I just got that wrong, ever?
I saw him named in the Chiefs squad.
Right.
So, yeah, I guess from that point of view, I hadn't heard anything more than that.
Sure. So, all 3 of them, so Kurbalo and Brad Weber, you'd probably draft Kurbalo 1?
Yeah, I'd think so. Pulu, not draftable.
No.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, like, a good player in fantasy, in some ways, an ideal fantasy halfback, but too much uncertainty, too much competition. I just think this is one of the cases where the opportunity is letting him down rather than the talent.
See, I think I agree. I think if Augustine Pulu played a full season and was the number 1 at the Chiefs, I might have him as my number 1 halfback.
Yep.
Only because of TJ Perenara, very, very good, but I'm not sure tries are a repeatable statistic.
Mm-hmm.
Things like meters and breaks are a lot more bankable, I guess you'd say, and that's what Pulu does.
No, that's right, sniping around the ruck and throwing bad passes, that's very repeatable for him. So.
Well, lucky they've got a couple of people from in the Chiefs team to do that. So we've got a little bit more information around the sevens and their availability. It looks like the New Zealanders and the South Africans are probably going to miss 2 games at around about the 12 and 13 round for Super Rugby, and the rest they're probably going to play. For Australia, Nick Spate, however, potentially not. Very unclear at this stage, and he's probably someone I am avoiding. The rest of the guys, apart from Sonny Bill, I guess, and Pulu we just mentioned, but the rest of the guys I'm not drafting with any concern that Sevens is going to have an impact. Is that kind of where you're going? You've got a draft this Sunday. We've got our podcast league draft. Is that what you're taking in?
Yeah, so I think 12 and 13, is that the last two Sevens events for the year?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So it's good to get that kind of clarity, and for me, 2 rounds, that point of the season, I'm probably not going to let that influence my drafting decisions.
No, I think so.
Nick Spate, though, is that...
Oh, did I say Nick again?
Yeah, friend of yours?
It is.
Yeah.
I've done that about 3 times now. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to write down his first name in my notes here so I just don't repeat the same mistake. Shout out to Nick Spate. Haven't seen you for a while, bud.
Definitely keep that in there, by the way. Yeah,
yeah, this is staying in, absolutely. I think Haggy might know him, actually, but anyway.
Well, now it's his, that's obviously going to be his new nickname. You see him streaking down the sideline for the Brumbies, you'd be like, here's Nick.
Yeah, it's a pretty unlikely situation if you knew Nick. But anyway, that's by the by. One other player, we'll end the news and notes with a bit of good news, is Israel Folau. So I believe he's still on track to play the next pre-season game for the Waratahs. He's certainly in full training and contact. So that's really good news.
Well, it's huge.
Massive news.
Yeah, I mean, I had him as my 4th ranked outside back. He might be looking at going straight back to number 1, and with the only caveat being the possibility of him playing centre. But if he's out there in the pre-season games and he's playing fullback, then definitely number 1 for me. Yeah,
it's going to be an interesting team sheet coming out of the Waratahs for, I think they're playing Friday night, but yeah. Very, very interesting. One of the players, I guess, that is competing with Folau for that number 1 outside back spot is Ndolo.
Yep.
And we'll get onto that in a little bit. Actually, we'll get onto it now because that's their first pre-season game that we just want to have a chat about. So the Crusaders turned over the Reds. I think it was fairly even first half, and then the Crusaders just came over the top. A few subs came in. Marty Mack was playing 15, which I thought was an interesting... potentially a bonus for Fantasy Rugby Draft managers, but he wasn't kicking, and Richie Mo'unga was at that point. I think Vola kicked in the first half as well, but Mo'unga's been named at 10 again against the Highlanders down on that paddock in Otago somewhere. So we're moving Richie up purely on that basis. I think I'd probably still draft Marty McKenzie ahead of him if I was in that position. How say you?
I'm actually surprised to hear you say that. I would have thought that, obviously it's early days, difficult to say, but if you're looking at all the evidence that you've got right now, which is just one game, and it is a pre-season game, then I would have thought Mo'unga deserves to be drafted ahead of him.
Yeah, so my reasoning or my thought process is that Blackadder wants to put Mo'unga as much pressure in the pre-season as he can. He knows what he's got in Marty McKenzie. He's had the experience, he's played in Super Rugby. So I think he wants to give him every opportunity to, and that's probably why we didn't see Marty Mick kicking. I think experience probably will win out in the day on that first game, and McKenzie will come in. But yeah, it's only just for me that I'm drafting McKenzie still ahead of him.
Maybe Mo'unga won the kicking comp.
Yeah, maybe he did.
I think they had that in the car park before the game.
Like Rob said, the guys having the line-out training.
Yeah.
And another interesting kind of point in that game was that the Crusaders really only started to get a little bit of go forward or go over the top of the Reds once Ndolo moved into 12. I don't think this is just a pre-season gimmick. I have a feeling with Robbie Fruin out and Ryan Crotty out for a length of time that potentially they might move up and Ndolo might move in because they have outside backs at the Crusaders that they don't have midfielders. What do you think? Does that detract much from Ndolo? Do you knock him down a peg behind, say, Naholo and Milner Scudder?
No, not for me. I think, no. I mean, if anything, he'll be more involved. He'll handle the ball more, and it's not like his points necessarily came from carrying the ball back from deep, as they do for some other outside backs. They came from running over the top of people, and he'll get plenty of opportunity to do that playing 12, and also plenty of opportunity to offload and create assists and all those other things. So from that perspective, certainly not worried about that. I would say, just regarding him moving to 12 and the Crusaders getting going, it's one line in an article, and it just, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily read too much into that either. Like the suggestion that he changed the game by changing positions.
Oh, I agreed.
It's perhaps reading a little bit too much into it, but that's kind of by the by.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of Nadolo. I think there's not a hell of a lot of firepower in that back line. I know the Chiefs a couple of times were very, very clever at taking Nadolo out of the game on the wing. I think it's an easier proposition at 12 to take a player out of the game that's such a game breaker. So with the lack of other really penetrative options around the Crusaders, it's a little bit of a concern for me, but Nadolo is probably one of those. And he probably does fall down one rank behind Milner Scudder for me, but that's about as far as it goes. So the Blues had a pretty significant win against the Rebels. Now, I don't think it was a full-strength Rebels team, and by all accounts, a lot of the players in the Blues were available and got a good trot out. I guess the big points for us is that Rene Ranger's back, Mossman.
Yeah, it's a lot of hype,
isn't it? Wow,
it's a lot of hype. Yeah. And I'm sure he'll go well, but I mean, it's an interesting proposition having a Ranger Moala midfield. There's probably perhaps not a whole lot of subtlety there, that's for sure. So I don't know. Like, I'm not necessarily buying into the Ranger hype just yet.
Sure, that's fair. I think, I obviously he goes above Daliende, and I think for me he probably still goes above Fekitoa around about that mark, but you and I might differ there a little bit, but you're both going to get good output from both, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a good nickname from him. Well, I've heard a couple of good nicknames. So Coochie Town calls him Renegade, based on the American TV show, if you've ever seen it, Rene Raines.
I remember that, yep.
And I heard on the Fox podcast with Sean Maloney and Scotty Stevenson this morning that they called it the Reno-ranging. So they're rearrangering. So, yeah, that's quite clever. He's not barnstorming, he's rearranging. Tongue twister, but yeah, here we go. So another one that I thought that I thought he was going to be eased into was Matt Duffy. So he's been named at 15 for the trials, and I think he'll play there again. Word is that all the reports I see now, I don't know if that's just Tana trying to big him up and seeding this in the media, but is that he's going to be the starting fullback, Matt Duffy. What do you make of that?
It'd be an unusual move, I guess, in some ways. I thought fullback outside back generally is an area that they've kind of got covered. I don't think that Visania did anything wrong. If anything, he's probably been one of their best players over the last 2 seasons. There's been some talk about Matt Duffy from his league background being good in the air, but I think we kind of talked about this off air before, whether in the modern day game that having your fullback being the aerial expert is necessarily such a big deal, because it seems like all of the back three get tested with high balls. So he might be equally as at home on the wing, and that aerial ability just as useful in that position.
Yeah, and one player that I thought, I've spoken to a couple of people about that probably isn't getting as much mention as I thought he might, is Melani Nanaivai. I really quite liked what he did, and he played very well in the ITM as well. He just looked a bit more home there. So I think, I was speaking to someone about this, is that they suspect it might be a Visania Lamb Duffy back three. I thought that was a bit of an interesting ruling him out straight away, but I guess we'll see a little bit further down the line. No, he was a good stepper, and he was a good output in Fantasy Rugby last year. Yeah,
definitely. I agree with you. I like him quite a lot. Liked what I saw from my team cup. It seems that he's just constantly improving and stepping up, and you wouldn't necessarily say the same with Lamb. I think probably flattered to deceive a little bit at first class rugby level, ITM Cup, Super Rugby level, comes with that sevens pedigree, and it's not that he hasn't done good things, but he's not exactly set the world on fire either.
No, I agree. He wasn't very good at all last year for the Blues, and maybe that's just because the Blues weren't particularly useful either, but he seems to be a little bit better in the ITM Cup the last season, and obviously we've all seen what he does in the sevens, so maybe that gives him a bit of a fillip to play well, and maybe he's just finding his feet, but I certainly wasn't particularly impressed compared to, say, Visanera Nanaivai. I guess there's not a hell of a lot to talk about in other games. I think you look at the Hurricanes got humped by the Force, probably gives a good indication of where we are at in pre-season. But is there anything else that stuck out to you in any of the pre-season games that you wanted to kind of make mention for the listeners?
I did catch the Highlanders game, and I saw that Buckman came off injured, which is probably something to note. I haven't heard anything about it, but at the time it did look reasonably serious. So there's something to note there. And just in terms of things that caught my eye, I thought Fekitoa looked pretty sharp, and he's, I think, definitely one to watch this year. I'm sure we'll come to talk about players we like for the season, but thought he looked good in that game, and I guess doesn't have a lot of perhaps the minutes, the miles on the clock from the end of last year, because he didn't play as much probably. So could be someone that could come into this season fizzing. And I thought Liam Squire actually looked alright too.
That's who I was going to bring up.
Yeah,
because Nasi Manu obviously left out of the Highlanders, so they're looking for a similar type player, and I'm a big fan of Liam Squire. I think injuries have curtailed his career a little bit at the Chiefs. You would have seen a bit more firsthand of him. You're a fan too, yeah?
Yeah. No, a really good ball runner. Did well when he got his opportunity with the Chiefs, but he was sort of behind some decent players and didn't necessarily get a shot at the first team. So, he's sort of in a prime position to take an opportunity with the Highlanders, and I think he'll go well. Yeah,
I did see, was it Joey Wheeler that did that comical Barracuda song? If you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube.
Did see that.
It's a pretty decent watch. He doesn't have particularly big range in his voice, let's just put it that way.
No. There's he kind of muscles it. It's fair to say. There's some potential.
He shorthands it, just chokes down on it all, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's potential brain hemorrhage happening. Be careful not to burst a blood vessel.
You touched on Barracuda, so that could open up the door. No, Rob Thompson wasn't playing in that game, was he?
I didn't see him. No, I did see Jason Emery come on.
Interesting one. I don't know, maybe he's injured or elsewhere, but I thought that might have been a pretty good opportunity to slot in, but now you are looking at that if Barracuda's out for any significant amount of time, so don't have the info in front of us, but make sure you have a look anyway to see if you can find out what's up with Rob Thompson, because he's a quality player. Okay, let's have a quick chat about the podcast league. It's almost complete. So we made the decision, we'll get the carryover champion, so Justin Vermeulen, well done. We'll get the worldwide winner, which is Dylan Jacobson. Yourself, Mossman, up for it again, and Coochie Town. And we've got three others, and we've got two spots that are still available. Two managers couldn't make the draft, which is this Sunday at 8:30 New Zealand time, Valentine's Day. So drop a note if you do fancy it, and you fill those two managers spot. But the other three spots were Richard Gordon, put a good email in. Edward Pye, very, very comical, had some good names in there. I'll dig a few out. And Ricky Smith, but I thought I'd read a little bit of Ricky's entry. I thought it was a good apt of how most fantasy drafters feel. So he goes, so you're probably talking to one of the most unlucky drafters of this generation. Using my skills learnt in actuarial science, I provided this statistically with 99.9% confidence. Further than my test, I was lucky enough to be in the finals of last year's league against Dylan Jacobson, the top-ranked manager in the world. Never mind that half my players are on team sheets didn't play, I didn't stand much of a chance. But above all that, I have a skill unparalleled by anyone you've ever come in contact with. I have my first draft pick will be the biggest flop skill. In the two draft leagues I've played in recent months, my first pick in each was James O'Connor and Eden Hazard. As sad as it is to say, I'm solely responsible for the destruction of their careers. So if you want to make sure certain players go off the radar, hit me up. So we have, and you're in the league, Ricky. Congratulations, nice entry. But yeah, as I say, we're missing two players now, so drop us a note, and we'll see how we get on draft day on Sunday.
Well, I think Ricky should be allowed in the league with the proviso that he doesn't draft Aaron Cruden in the first round.
Maybe. We put that wee caveat in there. I like it. All right, so we'll move on to ADP now, which is average draft position. And a little bit of background about what average draft position is. So we take a statistic and a calculation across all the leagues that have been drafted. What number or what round or what position did certain players come in? So at the moment, the drafts, the average draft position for the top 10 looks very, very familiar to the rankings. Some of them have moved out and moved up. For instance, a good example is Falau actually has moved out a little bit, as has Naholo, and Sopowanga's moved up quite significantly from where we had it. But just looking at the largest or the biggest rises in Fantasy Rugby Draft for this season so far of the leagues that have been drafted, the top of that list, any guesses, Mossman?
Ooh, well, I mean, you'd think it would be a replacement player for someone who was out injured, but I'm going to be wrong in my most George Bailey-esque fashion.
It's probably, and you can probably understand why, it's Ihaia West. And it goes exactly what you said at the start of the podcast, which is the Blues are getting a lot of hype at the moment.
Right.
There's a lot of press around, as you said, Ranger. The Ioane brothers in the sevens obviously make everything look a little bit rosier, and there's a good buzz around what Tana's doing. But so Ihaia West.
Yeah. Tana did actually come out and say that Ihaia West was going to get the first shot at it, and he's a senior guy now, and it's sort of his job. So I guess there's always that as well.
Yeah, and what average ADP actually pulls out as well is where potentially our rankings could be wrong, or we could be high on someone, or we could be low at someone. Mm-hmm. If you see them consistently falling, is that people value that a lot higher, and Ihaia West is one of those. Second name on the list is an interesting one. Just to get back, so Piers Francis looks like he was injured, went off in a moon boot, I believe, for the trial match or for the preseason match. Who's probably going to be the backup to Ihaia, but he looks like he's okay, cleared of any serious injury, he's fit to start the competition, so that's good news. The second on the list is Israel Dag. What do you make of that?
Some people must know some stuff we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, last I heard was on the practice squad, which I think was because he wasn't actually fit or playing at all. So, yeah, unless he's been telling people down south, down the Christchurch way, that he's fit and he's going to be back, then, yeah, perhaps they know something we don't.
I suspect it might be the opposite.
That people don't know that he's not there.
That he's not going to be there for the start of the competition. They see him so lowly in the ranks.
And they think...
and they draft a name.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're probably right, actually. That makes way more sense.
But yeah, I'd like to think it was good oil. But from what I can tell, it was mid-April, and I haven't heard anything since. Yeah, and he seems to be having a pretty decent pre-season anyway, tripping around. So I suspect, that date's not far off the mark. The next one, and this probably goes with the next couple actually, probably go with a bit of the wave of support that it's been. But the Highlanders front row and Aaron Smith are the next two cabs off the rank.
I think that's what you're saying about they're the top team, they're the current champions, so they must be good. And I think that's probably not the case with front rows. Doesn't necessarily correlate that the top team is the top front row. I don't know if there's any particular reason that I would be rating the Highlanders front row this year, from a fantasy perspective anyway. So, yeah.
I agree, and I think, I think it's one of those where the Highlanders have got a little bit of a cult following in this country. For those outside in Australia and New Zealand, you probably pick up on it, but it's a bit of an in vogue thing to support the Highlanders. Maybe, I guess it's just one of those underdog things, so I guess this kind of goes hand in hand with that. Aaron Smith, he was a bit hit and miss, wasn't he, last year? He started off okay and then just went terrible for a big long stretch and then came back.
No, he's an average fantasy halfback.
Yeah, that's right. I think you could get replacement.
Yep.
I don't think you'd go reaching for him. I think you'd be happy enough with him if you didn't choose to target a halfback in your draft.
That's right.
And another interesting player, and this is actually, I think, is to do with people being on the ball and being quite aware of what's going around, is Francois Steyn. I think a few folks have seen the Lambie injury, and the last few drafts have drafted him fairly highly. Now, maybe that's because they think he might get a few more opportunities more than Joe Peterson would. I think Joe Peterson will carry the majority of them, but is that just purely because we ranked him quite lowly, or do you think also it's a mixture of both?
It's probably a mixture of both, but you're right. There will be some opportunity while Lambie's out. I'd imagine that from time to time he's going to get those long-range shots. So, yeah, he probably deserves to be drafted a little bit higher, perhaps than his low rank, but I wouldn't go crazy over it, that's for sure.
So there's 3 halfbacks in the top 10 of average draft position rises. I'm not sure if that... I suspect that might tell you something, that the folks coming in potentially for the first time maybe don't look at the output of a halfback and base it purely off the naked eye watching a rugby game. The Aaron Smith, TJ Perenara and Bryn Hall are the 3 that are in there. So I wonder if there's a little bit of, well, these guys are pretty good. I want them in my team as opposed to any kind of statistical analysis.
I'd say there's definitely an element of that. I guess the other thing that we've talked about before is that we generally like to draft as late as possible, so we have as much information as we can. So it sort of suggests to me that maybe some of the early drafts and perhaps people that aren't as experienced.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. No, I could buy into that a little bit. Yep. And a good one in there is Peter Grant at number 7. Managers on the ball. I actually heard an interesting... So again, with the Fox Sports rugby podcast with Sumo and Maloney, and they were talking about Peter Grant brought in and just to kick goals, but Maloney actually brought up, he said, because he's going to be commentating a lot of those games, and he said that he want John O'Lance in there. So that's the second endorsement we've heard of John O'Lance, and he did actually kick a few goals and play 10 very, very well against the Hurricanes in pre-season. So certainly an interesting one to watch. We hear the story about the Force wanting to be a little bit more attacking and a little bit more adventurous, and that fits with the John O'Lance theme, not necessarily the Peter Grant theme. So,
yeah, I did read somewhere that Peter Grant had come back from Europe, I think that's where he was, to the Force for another shot at winning a Super Rugby title. And I think
I read that too.
I think he's going to be sorely disappointed
if that's his only driver. Then potentially setting him up for a fall. Yeah,
I think his agents possibly even telling him some things have changed while he's been away that are not true.
Yeah, maybe. The last player I wanted to talk about on this list, it's a bit of an interesting one considering the position he played in pre-season, was Zach Gilford. I guess it's twofold. Even if he does play on the wing, that's great. End of the Waratahs backline, that's good. But he was playing at fullback for the pre-season in that first game, and I guess the other big bonus is that he's not in jail at the moment.
that's always it's quite a good attribute for any fantasy rugby player.
You don't make the club from the tub.
No.
I think. So what do you make of Zach? Is that 15 just an experiment? If they do want to push Folau into that 13, is it going to be Beale and potentially Guildford back there?
I wonder if it's just the fact that those other guys weren't featuring in this game, that just they needed somebody to fill that space. So I'm not reading too much into it. Didn't have a whole lot of experience even back in the day.
No. At
15 in New Zealand, so would seem like a bit of a risk.
I would be very uncomfortable if I had Zach Guildford as my fullback.
Yeah. If you want that kind of calm head at the back, he's probably not your guy.
No, I agree. I suspect it might have been just your numbers up. It's just horses for courses at that time. Who have we got available? Can't play the Wallabies, and obviously the Waratahs are stacked full of it. So,
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think him and I think we'll get, as you alluded to it, we'll get onto a few rankings and sleepers and who to avoid in the next podcast. But the battle between him and Reece Robinson and who plays on the wings, it'll be an interesting one. certainly go a long way, because I think if you can nail that down, I think they'll play quite well. Also, Rob Horn's in there, but whether he moves in or not. A lot of unanswered questions from Gibbo. Okay, so let's go down to the folks that have fallen. And the first name on the list, we've already talked about him, is Ben Lamb. I think this is mainly around we ranked him too high. I think I'm certainly surprised to see him the top of this list after what he did with the sevens. And that's all I can possibly think it is that we've ranked him too high to where people want to draft and where they're looking at wingers. Have you got any other take on that?
I don't. I think that's the only thing that kind of makes sense, because it's pretty counterintuitive, because it's, for all the others we're saying, well, they get a little bit of hype, which is exactly what he's had through the sevens, should be rising. So it's difficult to fathom that one.
Next name on the list is an obvious one, Damien Delende. I thought he might actually be number one, but I guess it wasn't really clear how long he's going to be out for. I guess it's still not clear how long he's actually going to be out for, so maybe that's why he wasn't top of the list. It's an interesting one. When we talked about the Highlanders front row being the winningest team last year, or the one that won the competition at least, shall we say, and that's why the people picked the Highlanders front row. The Rebels front row is third on the list, is the lowest, or the highest faller, if you will. Faller's further in ADP. What do you make of that?
Yeah, just not a sexy name, is it? The Rebels front row.
No, that's right. I guess Shotahori going as well. They've had a couple of movements away from there, but they did actually purchase someone from the Reds, wasn't it? James Hansen, Chubba Hansen. So, yeah, I'm not sure that's justified, and I certainly think the next one isn't justified at all. So the next on the list is Johnny McNichol, number 4, and I think it's exactly what you just said. He's not a very sexy name. He was really good in the ITM Cup, and he's been pretty good for the Crusaders when he's been fit.
This one was actually shocking to me because like you said, we're gonna talk a little bit about sleepers. Well, he would be on my list. He's a guy that, I mean, especially now we're talking about Ndolo moving in. You know, he's probably going to get a really good opportunity on the wing for the Crusaders. So if anything, you know, his value should be going up.
And I personally feel when we did the rankings, and we were at the rankings summit, that we ranked him, I suspect we may have even ranked him quite low. We've got him at 59, which is just at the end of the 6th round. I don't know, that seems awfully like a good money for there, especially if Ndolo goes in. I think he's one of those spots certainly nailed on. I don't know, it just seems odd to me.
Yep. No, I mean, I've got him ranked at the moment as my 22nd ranked outside back. That's reasonably high. That's pretty high. So, yeah.
That's a couple of names on the list, which I thought was a bit surprising. Well, actually, I'll get into it. So, Sia Khaleesi and Schogberger. Not all that surprised to see Sia Khaleesi on the list. It probably fits with what Brendan was talking about and what you were mentioning. But I'm a bit surprised to see Schogberger on that list. Is that folks getting a little bit wary about how many kilometres he might have on the clock?
Yeah, I think maybe people are just expecting him to fall off a cliff at some point. And maybe they think that that's going to be this season. Yeah, maybe. I was certainly surprised to see 2 Stormers on the list there who are probably going to be starting back rowers. And the last one probably goes along with the Rebels' unsexiness, but Dominic Shipperley. He's a fantasy favourite of ours. I'm not too sure why he's there. He's a guy that actually, and maybe this is illustrating the point, a guy that is unsexy. You're not punching the air once you draft them, but he'll get you a lot of points week in, week out. No, for sure. 15th ranked outside back for me at the moment as well. So yeah, once again, can't really explain that one.
No, absolutely. Okay. The other name on the list that I just briefly wanted to touch on and maybe ask you, have you heard much more information around what the Hurricanes midfield would be? Because we've got Peter Aki as one of the fallers on this list.
Right. No, I don't think that one would necessarily be based on information or any kind of intel that people are getting. Once again, probably just a case that you rated him in your rankings, and other people obviously don't. So someone's going to be right and someone's going to be wrong.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so yeah, if you want any more info on ADP, how it works, if you guys anyone's new to the concept and you want to do it, we post it on Facebook every week. We put the top 5 and the bottom 5, and we'll put that up again this afternoon. Another little bit of point. We're at that time of the season where you need to start ignoring a lot of your league mates' subjective views on players, because a lot of the time it's bullshit. So yeah, it's a lot of, I hear Reno Ranger's injured, or I'm not particularly sure that Fekitoa is a good choice this season. I've heard Jamie Joseph wants to move away. Little things like that get seeded on Twitter, they get seeded on Facebook. Discussions in pubs. Just be very careful about what you listen to and what you don't actually take in.
Misdirection and deception.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so the cloak and dagger stuff's coming in now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you and I can't be all that cloak and daggery when we discuss the guys on the podcast. So we're fairly open book, but we'll try as we may. And to that point, next podcast it'll either be a discussion on rankings. Mossman, I know you've made a few up, and we'll have a discussion on layouts versus the site. Also look at some sleepers and who to avoid. But we also potentially could we're trying to jack up someone to come in and chat with the New Zealand rugby squads. It doesn't look like that's too far away. So it'll be one or t'other. A little bit of admin. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rugby Draft. That's Fantasy RG Draft. On Facebook as well. Facebook is actually where we do most of our posts. So if you want to see injuries, if you want to see ADP, if you want to see preseason stuff, if you want to see where the podcasts are put up, just follow us on Facebook. That's probably where we put most of our activity. If you've got any questions, drop us a note on support@fantasyrugbydraft.com. Still looking for 2 folks for the podcast league for this Sunday, so drop us a note and you get in there. It's probably about all the time we have today. Thanks for listening. I'm Bruce Hawkinson. He's Nathan Mossman.
Love your work, Wadey.
And you're a pedo.
What a bust here by Christian Cullen. Plenty of support, and what a dummy!